I'm Justin Harvey. I'm Managing Director for Incident Response globally at Accenture Security. My blue team sits within the Fusion X business unit. So my peer, Tom Parker, runs red teaming. And what I want to talk to you today about is this new concept called purple teaming. The problem as it is in the industry today is that consulting companies aren't doing their clients very many favors. They're not doing our clients very many favors because organizations globally are spending hundreds of millions of dollars and they're still getting hit. They're still getting hit with ransomware, destructive malware. I mean, we all know the problems, right? We just have to pick up the news. Adversaries are getting smarter and the threatscape is evolving and getting worse. We all know that, duh. And what we saw in the industry is an opportunity to do a realistic assessment and help our customers get better at detection, triage, and response. Now I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a admission here. I do believe that I've been part of the problem. As someone who's run consulting organizations for over a decade, yes, I'm part of the problem. I was that guy. No, there's an assessment for that, sir. If you come in, we'll interview your people. This is the standard model for consulting these days. You go, I assume many of you are working for organizations. You're not on the consulting side of the house. If you're on the consulting side of the house, then maybe we can work together to solve these problems. But for the most part, we've walked in as consultants and said, you need help. Well, we need to assess where you are. And so the assessment is maybe a tabletop exercise or a document review, or line up your people outside and you act like the Bobs from The Office, right? You're like, what is it you say you do around here? And then we write everything down and we make a recommendation. And then there's also penetration testing. Look, there's nothing wrong with penetration testing, but just by doing penetration testing alone does not really equal it's not an effective measurement of your organization's ability to respond, detect or respond, or even triage your organization's cyber posture. So I kind of gave it away here. Purple Team Engagements, Assess Maturity and Test Effectiveness. I'm getting there. So these are many of the questions that we are fielding these days from our customers. Have we identified all the attack surfaces, which is, of course, where penetration testing and threat and vulnerability management programs are? Many clients ask me, do we have the right tools and techniques in order to respond to a variety of attacks? And I always like to try to give out a little bit of advice here that's a little off script. Many of you probably, like 90% of the room already probably know this, but what we use inside of our team for developing use cases, a great website out there from MITRE, the MITRE Attack Matrix. Are you guys aware of that website? It's awesome. It's really, this quasi-government research organization has really been great at codifying all of the types of threats and techniques so that you can convert those to use cases. Do you know what the adversaries are really after? Not really even who they are, but do you know what they're after within the organization? And then so forth and so on. A purple team engagement is really a combination of a blue team and a red team operation. And I'll get into a little bit of the work product. But essentially, it's the red team doing a standard attack, or doing as we like to call it, a hyper-realistic simulation. And then we have our blue team members sit within the Security Operations Center and the incident with the incident response team in order to observe and coach and recommend that. And if you're wondering if a purple team engagement or a purple team style of program is right for your organization, I would say it's really for security operations centers and companies and militaries and governments that think they got it. Many times, I like to divide the entire world in half. There are those companies that feel that they got it, and then there are those companies and militaries and governments that realize they need some help. And I've always said this: I don't think that red teaming, in my definition of the word, hyper-realistic, zero knowledge, zero notice, is an effective means of helping security operations centers and incident response teams that aren't ready for it. So this is for those organizations. On the other half, they're like, no, we got it. We're ready to go, and we feel like we need a little bit of a check. Typical timeline, I don't know if you guys can see the gray on white. It actually doesn't look too bad up here. But it's essentially a parallel program where we are doing adversary simulation in one thread, and we're doing the blue team assessment in the same thread. And I get asked many times, how do you pull this off? Like, how do you, if the red team is performing their operation, does the SOC and IR team know it? And if they don't know it, how do you sneak in and observe the SOC and IR team? Because if I was sitting in the SOC or the IR team, I'd be like, who are these yahoos in suits? Actually, we don't always wear suits, so, but very consulting-like with our Toomey bags. And the answer to that question is, it depends. There are some organizations that we work with that the board will come to us and say, we want you to do this with no knowledge to the security team, or a little bit of knowledge. We want your blue team to walk in there and say they're doing one of the assessments with the interviews and the document process, and you sit in the SOC and you wait for something to happen. And we do work with some organizations. By the way, I'm sweaty because I ran here from the other hotel. Not that I'm normally sweaty. We do this sometimes where we actually do let our partners and customers know that we're performing the operation, and even in some cases, you can do this with your own within your own organizations, where you use your own red team and/or you use your own blue team. But we have worked this where there's absolutely no knowledge by the SOC and IR team. From a red team perspective, we have really taken the bar. We've set the bar a little bit higher when it comes to red teaming. When you think about the evolution of offensive security in the marketplace, it really began. Let's see. I'm trying to think back to when I first heard about quasi-offensive. I think 94. Does anyone remember that old toolkit in 94 named Satan? And thank you. And then, of course, there was like the patch that you could download to turn it into Santa if you didn't want to tell your company that you were running Satan in the environment. So really, in the 90s, it started out with vulnerability assessment. Are there vulnerabilities within the organization? Because we thought back then that was the way to go. And if we could identify all the vulnerabilities, you could monitor them and you'd be okay. Then we realized that's not very scalable, particularly in the 2000s when we started getting into 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200,000 nodes. And I know many of my clients, TVM, or threat and vulnerability management, is a dirty word because it's tough. I'm not sitting up here as a glib consultant saying, hey, you guys need to patch your stuff. But I do know that it's quite complicated to balance the dollars with the number of vulnerabilities out there, and then of course cross-reference that with the score or the impact, and then of course what do you prioritize, because there's only so many people. You guys know that there's like this I don't know, information security skill shortage out there. Maybe we've heard about that. So then it went from vulnerability management, it went to penetration testing. So the penetration testing was, can we actually try to exploit some of these vulnerabilities? Did they work? And you pen testers in the audience, I would appreciate you not taking me out back and beating me up after this. But I think penetration testing is more of like 0 or 1. Can we exploit the vulnerabilities that are out there? And then you pen testers in the audience, you're like, well, let's figure out a way to make this a little bit more interesting, and let's string together a few exploits, and let's see if we can actually, I was going to say do some damage. No, not do some damage, but let's see if we can actually get in and do some stuff. So that's where red teaming was born. How do we get inside the enterprise? How do we break into a database or an app server or a workstation? And then what we've done is we saw an opportunity in the marketplace where we would go to the C-suite or we'd go to the board, and it's funny, whenever I think about the board, I think about like the Hudsucker Proxy. You guys remember that movie? All those old guys sitting around the table. And real boards don't look like that, at least normally. So you go to the board and you're like, here's the red teaming results, and it really didn't make an impact with them. They would sit there and say, yes, so what? All right, so we'll just dump another $1 million into the security budget. Actually, that's a lie, because no board has ever said that in history. We're going to give you guys more money. So we're going to, so what? And that's really where we have taken the market from what we call adversary simulation. And what that means is we're able to do an engagement that mimics an adversary. And we do that through an adversary appropriate engagement or a decision point. So the way that we work our red teams is that we determine ahead of time what adversary is most appropriate for that client. And you yourselves are probably in the audience thinking, who are my adversaries? And because it wouldn't be very fair to simulate a nation-state attack versus a retail organization. And it wouldn't be very fair to simulate cyber criminals versus a defense industrial base company. And in fact, those two types of adversaries definitely are coming closer together. I'm sure you've read the reports at nation-state and cyber criminal organizations. Forget colluding. They're just becoming more and more aligned and similar in capabilities, tactics, techniques, and procedures. So with that being said, we do want to tailor the red team exercise appropriately, and then also agree upon some worst case scenarios. So unlike some red team exercises and unlike some pen test, we don't consider the full enterprise to be in scope or within the bounds. Definitely agree ahead of time. We had one very large company come to us and say the agreed upon objective was to blow up a refinery. And we were like, come again? And they're like, no, we want you to try to blow up one of our refineries. And we were like, I'm not sure we can get that through legal. So what we agreed upon was to compromise up to the point of entry at that refinery, and then call timeout, and then get moved from that into a lab, and then of course to continue the engagement. And then from there, we socially engineered the industrial control system company to send some of the hardware and reverse engineer it, and then attack and override the safety controls and blow up the refinery, virtual refinery. I hope I didn't freak anyone out. But it's that type of objective that we want to accomplish with a red team. It's through those sorts of exercises and those sorts of goals that make a big difference with the C-suite and the board. It changes the conversation from hey, did you know that my red team could use Eternal Blue on 30% of the environment to compromise and to access data? Because I would be shocked if any board member, and if there's board members here, I'm probably in trouble, but I'd be shocked if any board members were like, yeah, I totally know what Eternal Blue is, and they could rattle off what the impact is. But what they do understand is that M word. They do understand money, they do understand revenue, and they do understand the ability to get that revenue. And we've certainly seen in the news in the last month or two some big impact stories. I'm sure you guys have read about Petya, not Petya, whatever we're calling it today. Do we have a consensus yet on its? Is it not Petya, whatever? WannaCry 2? Actually, not WannaCry 2. But we've seen some entire enterprises, entire companies coming down, and I know I'm up here and many of you are technical, but I just have to tell you how important it is to get board buy-in, because board buy-in means more money, which means more people and or tools that we like to play with and to accomplish within the company. So, and those boards really only care about one thing, and that's, and I have to give credit where credit's due. One of my coworkers named Vic Desai says this. He says the board really only wants to know one thing. We're good, right? And part of having a good adversary simulation or red team is to be able to prove to them, or if we can accomplish that mission, then you are not good. And then, of course, we've got the blue team side of the house. I struggled with this slide. I struggled with it because red teaming and adversary simulation is more of a newer type component. Red teaming and adversary simulation is more of a newer type component. Some of you it's new, to some people it's not new, but it's the cutting edge. Blue team, we've been around for decades, and I think one of the advantages to having, even if you have the best SOC and IR team in the world, and I've run, I don't think this is like I've run the best SOC and IR team in the world. There's great ones out there, but when I've run SOC and IR, I will any day take anyone coming in and look at my stuff. I love that, as long as we're not giving them state secrets, but I love when consulting companies come in because they bring that fresh perspective. They bring that sort of mindset to, oh yeah, I was at another organization just like you over in the Netherlands, and they did it this way. And I think that what makes a great security person or great cyber defense or great red teamer or blue teamer or developer is that that information, that quest for information, the ability to, the natural curiosity, to bring in a fresh perspective and to say, how are other companies doing that? And then doing practicing shameless copying or plagiarism. No, I don't mean official plagiarism, but the best form of flattery is, what's the phrase? Best. That's right, imitation. You like how I did that? I was like, yeah, I'm just testing you, but I didn't know. And this purple team engagement, the way that we operate it is, like I've said before, there are two prongs. So we're doing the attack simulation on one hand, and the red team is in communication with the observing blue team. The reason for that is that there are multiple conditions, or there are multiple outputs or outcomes that could happen in this type of engagement. One outcome could be that the SOC team or the IR team doesn't detect the red team, which would make for a very crappy engagement for us, right? One line, red team wasn't detected. That was our observation. Our coaching is, you should get better detection, and then we're done. No. So what we can do is, if the red team is doing an operation, the blue team can call over and say, can you ratchet up the noise? Can you bring up the noise level, be a little bit more overt in tripping off some sensors or logs or doing something that's a little bit more obvious? Because it wouldn't do us very much good if we stopped the engagement and said, can you guys tune your SIM, tune your detection software, can you do it this way? What we're trying to do is have a snapshot in time and to be able to observe and then coach and recommend based upon the actual detection and response to that to our adversary simulation. And then of course, if the ratcheting up of the noise doesn't work, then we can also, as observers, we can step in a little bit and say, hey, you should look at that screen right there. You should do that pivot in the sim. Maybe you should do an EDR query and pull the flight recorder because you might find something amazing, right? And so when they get to that point and they see the alert, they're like, oh yeah, there's LSAS injection on this endpoint. And then we get a little smile and we're like, okay, keep going. And then like, well, let's do an EDR query. Okay, and we write that down and we observe. And then by doing a red team simulation or an adversary simulation, we get to see their thought process. We get to see them think through the steps. And it's really great when the SOC and IR team don't know, because if it jumps immediately from LSAS injection to let's wipe the box, then you know there's a problem. I mean, for those of you who are not IR people, if you see something bad, the first step is not to go wipe the box, which I see all the time. This first step is to actually analyze and triage what the problem is, right? I'm a fan, there's no right or wrong way, but I'm a fan of taking a live response of the system and doing triage and enriching it with threat intel versus, of course, wiping the box and or this is a religious thing, I'm sorry. If I offend anyone, I'm sorry, but I don't believe in immediately forensically imaging the box. A lot of people are like, no, I'm gonna just throw FTK and NCase on there and get started. Let's do a little bit more triage before we take a drastic time step from that. Another step is, I see quite often, is to immediately, you guys are gonna call BS, but to immediately shut down the box as well. So I see that quite a bit. Let's shut down the box and walk it over to the SOC so they can look at it. And I see a few of you shaking your heads like, oh my gosh. Yes, you will lose running memory. If they didn't put it to sleep, then you're gonna lose a lot of your forensic artifacts. But it's little things like that that you would be surprised that organizations are missing these days. And then, of course, once they get into that sort of process, you get to see them, maybe they do a live response and they're like, oh my gosh, there was LSAS injection, it was Mimikatz, it was this, it was that, they were doing pass the hash, and being able to analyze and watch the thought process. And maybe I just love, maybe I just romanticize incident response too much, but I do believe it's an art. And part of this art form is to be able to take things like efficacy and triage and time, all the dimensions that you would really assume, and what's the appropriate allocations of that. Do we spend, how much time is the IR team and the SOC doing triage versus the IR team working the case? Because in a lot of the larger environments that I operate in, there's only a finite supply of people. I made a funny earlier, but most customers, all customers are struggling with not being able to find enough people. It doesn't matter if you're in Bentonville, Arkansas, or New York City, or Bangalore, India. There's just simply not enough people. And what we want to be able to do in these sorts of engagements is observe and make those recommendations saying, hey, you know you got 30 level ones, and yes, your level one did see that alert. They saw the LSAS injection because Carbon Black picked it up or because Tanium picked it up. But then that level 1 spent 2 hours in dwell time because they did X, Y, and Z, and you wasted 3 hours before escalating it to level 2, and it sat in a level 2 queue for 3 hours or overnight. I mean, do you guys remember there's a major retailer based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, that got hit a few years ago. That was a joke. I mean, we all know who it is. And there, it wasn't, that retailer didn't have a failure in detection. It was a failure in triage. It was the FireEye box caught the malware, and it sent a syslog event over to the SIM, which was ArcSight, and then it went to a SOC that just let it sit there in the queue, and it wasn't properly triaged because FireEye classified it as malware.binary, which, if you know FireEye, that's the generic, that is the generic classification for malware that doesn't have any attribution, or you don't know what it is. It just looks bad. And so we want to be able to uncover those types of situations. And to bring it back to an earlier point, remember I was kind of talking about that red team versus adversary simulation mindset? There's a very particular detail of that. And I know I work for Accenture Security, I work for FusionX, and this is, it's a little bit preachy, but I want to be able to talk to you guys as peers and feel, I mean, this should be shameless plagiarism on your part. Like, take what we do and bake it into your stuff. And part of that is, part of that is a big leap from thinking about adversary simulation and red teaming as a technical operation and thinking about it in terms of a business operation. And that's really key. And you might think, well, how does that even make sense? How do you red team? What would be the purpose? The whole purpose is we exist to protect enterprises. We exist to detect and triage and respond. And at the end of the day, we exist to protect the enterprise. Now, there are absolutely some government people in here. So when I say money, think about state secrets or thinking about providing critical services. But there's a function of your organization, whether it be for money, revenue, whether it be for defense purposes, whatever, or to provide life-saving support. You have to think about this in terms of an objective, not just to overrun the system and to get in, but what can you do once you're in order to elicit a response? And that's what we accomplish with our red team. And then, of course, you've got the blue team side of the house that is observing, coaching, and recommending. The benefits from this type of operation is that it tests the effectiveness. And this is really what I was talking about at the beginning, is that this is when I admitted I was part of the problem, being a consultant for a long time, the standard Bob approach to consulting. We're going to come in, we're going to review documents, and we're going to interview people. And then at the end, we're going to give some magical score based upon your SOC or IR using the CMMI, right? The Capability Maturity Index or the Carnegie Mellon Maturity Index, whichever one you adopt. I'm much more of a old school guy, so I'm going to say Carnegie Mellon, kind of like the US CERT versus the old school CERT. You guys remember that? You know, US CERT evolved from the CERT that used to be at CMU a long time ago. And at the end of the day, you get these scores. And I've done these, and then of course we've done purple team engagements, and they're like, I just had your competitor in here, and they said I scored 4.3 on this. So I don't know what you guys did, but it doesn't directly map to that. And this is the key here. There's a difference between maturity, measuring the maturity of the organization based upon a paperwork exercise, and then there is a measure based testing the effectiveness of it. And we really feel like that's really where much of this industry needs to go toward, is I almost said less paper, more results, but that sounded a little bit preachy. But it's more about how do we really test the effectiveness of the controls and the technology and move from there. These types of engagements also highlight a need for testing a company's or an organization's incident response plan. I'm going to say some controversial words here, and I would appreciate knowing no one beating me up. The first thing I want to say is that I think incident response plans are crap. And even the best ones that are written by the best people, I think, for the most part, I'm speaking in the 80-20 rule, 80%, I think that incident response plans are crap because an incident response plan, as I've seen it, is more of a paperwork exercise to say when the stuff hits the fan, we need to engage these people and call Bob and tell him that this happened, and then we interface with Sally, and then we make a determination, and there's all these indexes and graphs, and you do it once every 5 years. You print it out and you put it on the shelf, and I love doing these purple team engagement because it's like you see that dude who goes over to the bookshelf and pulls it down, dusts it off, and he's like, this person isn't even here anymore because they're putting in people's names into incident response plans. So what should companies be doing? First is an incident response plan should be baked into your SOC and IR team today in the form of a continuous response model. The glib statement is nothing should surprise you. With an incident response plan, it's like stuff happens, it's really bad, and this is how we're going to manage it. And if we have to use the immortal words of Kevin Mandia, breaches are inevitable. Yes, the breaches are going to happen. Incidents are going to happen. Actually, I think it's more like incidents are going to happen. Breaches can be avoided because I think breaches are like material loss of something. People are going to get in and they're going to muck around in systems and in networks. We got that. Or there's going to be very concerted attempts. So an incident should not surprise any organization. They should be prepared for it. So therefore, if incidents are going to happen, and hopefully not breaches, then the team needs to have a forward-looking hunter mindset, warrior mindset. I say this all the time to my clients. They come to me and they're like, well, what are we missing? We spent $10 bajillion on a SOC, we spent $10 bajillion on Tanium, and did anyone laugh at that one? All right, thank you, there were some polite laughs there. We spent $10 bajillion on EDR software, we have all this stuff, and we're still getting owned. Why is it? It's because there needs to be a warrior mindset. We are, to use the battlefield analogy, we are really unique as an industry because we're one of the only industries or domains in technology, or the only technology domain, or even forget technology. There's war, kinetic war, and then at this point there's cyber warfare. And whether you are experiencing it in your organization or not, we can all agree there are bad people out there. Some of them are world leaders. I won't mention any names. Who do you think I meant? I mean, Kim Jong-un, duh. There are bad people out there, and they want to do your organization harm. Some of them are hacktivists, some of them are thrill seekers, some of them are cyber criminals, some of them are nation states. So your job in the SOC or the IR team should always be looking to find those adversaries. We call them adversaries. In the old days, we used the H word. We've all seemed to, after what was his name, Johnny Lee, or after hackers came out, we kind of dropped that moniker, and now we use APTs, we use cyber criminals, we use adversaries. We have all these names for them, actors. But there are bad people out there that want to get into your environment. And what we have to do is we have to pivot from thinking about it in terms of compliance, and I've got a SIM, I'm just going to monitor. We need to think about it in terms of war. And in war, you have scouts, you've got intel people doing reconnaissance, you have battlefield command, and you make plans ahead of time, and then of course you've got people like the US Marine Corps with Marine Force Recon that are going out there and hunting for bad guys. We do the same, we should be doing the same thing. So an incident response plan shouldn't quite be needed. Now, you guys might say, well, what do we do when we find something? If we've got this warrior mindset, we're doing the hunting, what do we do? And the answer is it should be built into playbooks and runbooks. So you've got this volume of knowledge today. I think 80% of it should be baked into your runbooks and playbooks for your SOC and IR today. And in fact, if you go to the show floor, there's many organizations, many security vendors who are talking about this stuff like automation and orchestration and prioritization and workflow. That's great. I think that, and like e-playbooks, e-runbooks, those are very, very valuable. Being able to, in the old days, we used to do it the ghetto way. We had something called a wiki, and then we put all the SOC information in the wiki, and then the analysts would tab back and forth and say, I found this, what does this mean? But now, in modern day SOC and IR, we've got much better tools. So from that IR plan, 80% of it should be baked into your runbooks and playbooks today, and nothing should surprise us, and we need to be doing more things like hunting. With whatever tool or methodology you like to use, we need to be doing more hunting to find the bad guys. So then, there's that 20% that I said was missing. And that 20% is what to do when the stuff really hits the fan. And you might have said, well, you just said that when the stuff hits the fan, you go to this IR plan that has all the workflow. That's not what I'm talking about. That's already been baked in to the runbooks. What organizations need today is something called a crisis management plan. And the largest global companies are making this pivot. They're making this turn to say, IR plans don't survive the test of battle. We realize that in the event of a cyber attack, stuff is going to go down. And when you think about this, it's really bad. So our team has been working the last few destructive attacks this spring and summer. We were working destructive attacks in the Middle East last fall. And what we've learned is when the stuff goes down, it really goes down. So if you think about what we do today, we use, at my company, we use voice over IP, we use Skype, we use, what if you forget a coworker's phone number, what do? You go into the global account list or global address list and look them up, like who really remembers the person legal's name? I mean, if you're a small company, you do, but I don't remember legal's name or phone number. And so, during these destructive attacks or really bad attacks, all of that infrastructure cannot be counted on. So one of the things we do during the purple engagements is the red team conducts operations in order to disable some of the crisis management tools that we use day to day. Like I said before, voice over IP, instant messaging, all that stuff. And it really, there is a sort of funny, gleeful snicker you do when you see everyone running around. It's like, oh my God, the house is on fire, but then you realize how bad it can really be. So I think organizations should have more crisis management plans that talk about out-of-band communications. How do you, in the event of a big cyber attack and we lose our network, how are we actually going to communicate with each other and then be able to set all that infrastructure up? And not only that, but as we saw with NotPetya, this is not a joke. We had clients that were concerned and or getting hit that ran around to every data center or ran around to all the switch closets turning everything off. We also had clients that were putting wheeled whiteboards when people were walking in and said, shut down your machine as soon as you get in. But that brings up the interesting point about crisis management is if you need the ability in your company that when the next destructive attack comes out, and I've been talking about this for the last year and a half, 2 years, destructive attacks are the new norm. And there's not that much difference between ransomware and destructware, right? What's the difference? One of them is they're both the same, except in one, sometimes you get the ability to undestroy, right? Because in not Petya, it was ransomware, and you just don't get, you get the ability to pay. Has anyone checked that Bitcoin address lately? It's probably, up over 30, 40,000. You get the ability to pay, but you don't get the ability to decrypt. And if you don't have the ability to decrypt, you might as well be destructive malware. So your crisis management plan that we also exercise, sometimes exercise during a purple team engagement, is in the event of a destructive attack, how fast can you mobilize? I don't know about you guys, but there's something deep inside of me that feels really weird about shutting off switches in machines in the event of a cyber attack. Or one of the interesting things that we've been doing is working with customers to quarantine attachments. If there's a particularly vicious ransomware attack or attack that is going after, that's email borne, I see more companies that are they have a panic button for their email system, and it's quarantining all attachments, or quarantine the attachments, strip the content out, and email that during that period of time. Something in me just is really weird, because we've all been taught over the last decades is that it's all about uptime, it's all about resilience. You should be able to get through all of these attacks, and then crisis management plan. One of the parts of a crisis management plan is how fast can you shut everything down. That's crazy. I'm in the last 5 minutes here, and I guess I want to just recap some of the high points, and I'll stick around. That was my Arnold Schwarzenegger impression. To answer any questions you guys might have. I think that with one or the other, they're very valuable. I think red teaming is great. I love talking about red teaming and adversary simulation, and I think that every organization that feels like they got it, that they have a strong SOC or IR, could benefit from a good red team or adversary simulation. It is like what NATO does, right? NATO's a collection of militaries that know that they have to defend each other. They train together. They have or like the UN, it's multiple organizations fighting and drilling. And when the U.S. went with the UK and the coalition into Iraq, they didn't suddenly decide, let's fly our planes together and let's do all this stuff. No, they went through exercises. Many of you veterans know this, that you have to train, you have to live and breathe, and through combat. But a tabletop exercise, no matter how good it is still just that. It's a tabletop exercise. It's usually prescriptive. It's advance warning. You sit in, and I've been talking to reporters all week, and I use a little D&D. I think you throw a D20 or D100 and do the tabletop, and they were like, "What do you mean D&D? Dungeons and Dragons? We did this as kids." Actually, some of us still do. So. The purpose of a red team not only is to highlight and showcase if a business objective or a business service can be overridden or overrun or whatever, or impaired, but it's also to provide a sparring partner for the SOC or the IR team. It gives you that ability to really test what it is. Wouldn't you rather fight, if you know you have to fight and do a street fight, wouldn't you rather get in the ring first with a boxing helmet and the gloves and spar, rather than hit the bag every day, right? Because just hitting a bag is dumb. That'll make you strong, but it doesn't mean that you can do Brazilian jiu-jitsu when someone comes at you on the street. And you'd rather do that in a ring with someone friendly. You spar, and then you say, well, what'd you do wrong? Well, I dropped my head, or you came at me with the right and I didn't know how to do that. That's really what adversary simulation is about. And then, of course, the blue team aspect of purpling is to really observe, coach, and recommend. Even if it's not us, take someone to really observe and to give you that fresh perspective of, here's other incidents that we've worked, and they made that same decision that you just made, and here's what they did to fix that, or here's the pitfalls, and be able to learn from your mistakes. Because I feel like we as an industry suffer from defensiveness. I have some clients where the board will bring us in, and we do this, and the CISO or the security team doesn't want us there. We're humans. We don't come in like evil little consultants and rub our hands and say, let's make everyone look bad and let's just screw everyone over. We're there to help the organization, and security teams naturally get defensive. Like, you're coming in here and you're testing my stuff, and then if we're successful, they're like, no adversary would really do that, or I can't believe you did this. And what's more important, what I would really like to see is us being able to pivot as an industry and come together and say, yes, you got in that way. How do I fix that? Or we're going to fix that. I want you to try it again because you ain't getting in this time. Last little story I'll tell you here. We have a major client, a financial institution we've worked with for the last 6 years, and we do these red team engagements sometimes 3 or 4 times a year, and we were successful for the first year or two. And the SOC and IR team from this financial institution was like, these guys are good, but we're going to beat them. We are going to kick the crap out of them. So they got really good, and it's almost like they gamified this our red team coming at them every quarter, every couple months. They gamified it, and it became a matter of pride. And that organization today, it is like a pizza party at my office when we get a remote shell on like a VDI. It is funny because they have done so well at kicking the crap out of us and not letting us in. And what was funny about that gamification is that they actually found real adversaries. By always looking for that red team, by being competitive, by gamifying it, they've actually uncovered and been able to be successful at defending against normal adversaries, thinking that it was us. They've called us up and be like, yo, we found you. Like, we weren't in there. And it was pretty funny. So finally, I want to thank everyone for attending. I think this is one of the biggest crowds I've ever spoken to, so thank you guys so much. And secondly, sorry for being late. I know your time is valuable, so if there's any way I can make it up to you guys, I'm going to stay behind here. If any of you want to play Stump the Chump, me being the chump, come up and ask me some questions, and follow me on Twitter. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.